If anyone starts to hear what sounds like a jungle, it's just outside my window, and I could shut my window if need be. So please let me know. I have the unique situation of a park across the street, yet the birds like to congregate in the right outside the window of my apartment, in a protected area where my building is, and it sounds like a jungle at times. It's not quite there yet, but it could be, and it's often like that in the hour before dawn, which is not fun in the summer.
Sounds like an alarm clock.
It's the worst type of alarm clock.
Go ahead. Craig, it's 6:30. Do you want to give it a few more minutes? Because if you are reviewing any new policy decisions or progress reports from the MTA, that's important stuff. So we could wait a couple of minutes. I think.
Sure, well, I'm happy to wait a few.
I will say that there aren't many people signing in, so
Okay.
whenever you guys are ready to get going, you probably can.
Okay. Is the assembly member on? Do you know, Will?
I do not see her.
Okay, so I emailed you, Craig, but Assembly Member Rebecca Seawright is planning to join pretty soon after we start, and she has to leave immediately after she's done. So if you don't mind being interrupted to allow her to speak, Will allow us. Okay, then we should get started.
Oh, actually, she's just joining right now. So, or her offices, they all use her name.
We won't tell.
Well, if you want to get started and do the introductions and introduce her, since she has limited time. maybe we want to kick off.
Okay. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October meeting of the Congestion Pricing Task Force. I'm Alita Camp, co-chair with Craig Later. Craig will be starting off with a summary of what the MTA had to say last night at its hearing. But in the meantime, we have Assemblymember Rebecca Seawright, who would like to make some remarks and then leave quickly. Will, if you could post Corey Hassan. Corey is her chief of staff, his email in the chat. If you have any questions, Corey wanted you to know that you can email him directly for answers to your questions. Thank you. Assemblymember.
Thank you. It's great to see everyone this evening on such an important topic. I want to thank Alita Kemp and Craig Later, the co-chairs of Community Board 8's Task Force on Congestion Pricing. Last night, we submitted testimony to the MTA on the program. It's true that we're having a dueling traffic and transit crisis, and the congestion pricing plan promises to reduce Manhattan traffic, to improve our quality and boost revenue for our mass transit system. However, I want to go on the record that Manhattan deserves representation. We are acutely focused on the need for Manhattan community representatives on this board, and we've made our request in writing to the governor in a letter. I support the resolution of Community Board 8 and calling for the appointment of 2 community representatives from Manhattan to the Traffic Mobility Review Board. Residents living in our district north of 60th Street or living on Roosevelt Island will inevitably have to travel through the zone if they want to cross the Queensboro Bridge or travel into the Central Business District. Appropriate consideration for credits, discounts, and exemptions for populations unduly impacted by the tolling program must be made for Manhattan residents, for senior citizens, and our disabled neighbors. Our constituents who rely on taxis for hire vehicles and rideshare are already facing the additional costs of a congestion surcharge. Since 2018, for any ride starting below 96th Street, the costs are adding up, and Manhattanites will bear the burden of any additional pass-along costs. For delivery trucks and commuters, the toll is just the cost of doing business. But for Manhattan residents, the toll is a detrimental fee on the everyday routine. There are many questions that must be answered as this process unfolds. We must make assured that the positive results of the tolling program keep in mind the quality of life, affordability, and the needs of those who are disproportionately impacted, including our seniors and those going to medical appointments in Manhattan. I am inspired by our new governor that has come in, that she's going to listen to the community. She's going to listen to the electeds that represent the Upper East Side, and that we're going to be able to reason with her on these appointments to the board. So again, I want to thank you all for your commitment to this issue, and to the co-chairs for taking it on, and appreciate the resolution that you passed on this topic. I'll be seeing the governor next week in Albany, and so I'm going to again impress upon her and her key staff that these appointments have to be made from the borough of Manhattan. It's just outrageous to have it any other way. The devil is in the details, and so we must have our voices heard. So thank you, and have a good meeting this evening.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember. We're glad to work together with you on these important issues.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned earlier, Corey Hassan is available for questions if anyone watching, or watching the recording for that matter, has any. Craig, take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Alita. Good evening, everyone. So I just figured it would be helpful to provide a little bit of an update in terms of new information that we've learned since our last meeting back in late July, and also just summarize some of the facts that emerged from the congestion pricing hearing. And then when I'm done, Alita can just give a little background as far as what some of the themes were in terms of the commenters and the comments that were made at the meeting by the public last night. So I just want to start off, and this is in no particular order. I was really just following the order in which the information was provided. So when there were some clarifications regarding some of the policies, such as the fact that they disclose that vehicles that enter the toll zone will only be charged once per day. And we know there was a lot of talk about exemptions. So first, in terms of the exemptions that are on the books, they are required for, quote, qualifying vehicles transporting persons with disabilities and qualifying authorized emergency vehicles. I do want to mention, though, that with the presentation, for those who may not have been able to participate in the meeting, it was not a question and answer session. They did a presentation and accepted feedback and comments, but they did not respond to anything. It was not a back and forth, give and take type of discussion. So I just want to make sure that was clear. So in terms of exemptions, residents of the toll zone with gross adjusted incomes below 60,000 would be eligible for tax credits. And then there's talk about the Traffic Mobility Review Board, as we've discussed before, and as Assemblymember Seawright mentioned. They are the ones who are going to be recommending the toll structure to the board of the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. And the language they used was that this recommendation will include but not be limited to a plan for credits, discounts, and exemptions. I'm not sure what that means in terms of it not being limited to those, but again, as we think about credits, discounts, and exemptions, that it's really the Traffic Mobility Review Board that we need to think about in terms of influencing any resolutions that we may eventually put forward. Recommendations will be informed by a traffic study that must take into account multiple criteria, including ability to generate revenue required, impacts on traffic patterns and volumes, public safety, and air quality, among others. So that, at least, is the first time that I had seen any information regarding what the traffic study that's going to be the basis for this is going to be looking at. So there was, obviously, this was part of the environmental review process, and there was a lot of discussion about what the environmental assessment is going to be doing. So the environmental assessment will be assessing a range of scenarios informed by the public outreach that was provided throughout this first set of meetings that occurred. It will be studying multiple scenarios regarding things like the amount of congestion reduction that differing levels of toll rates will cause, and will allow for the full range of potential environmental impacts to be considered. And the toll rates will differ in each scenario, varying based on time of day, method of payment, and the types of discounts, credits, and exemptions beyond the two that I had previously mentioned that are required. So in other words, the tolls that they're thinking about are going to be variable. So they'll be higher. They're looking at, again, this is based off of what they're saying, they are clearly looking at higher tolls during peak periods and lower tolls during off-peak hours and weekends. And based on the type of method of payment as well, and I'll get to that in a minute. They said, and this is a quote, "All else being equal, the more credits, discounts, and exemptions provided, the higher the toll must be to meet the project's purpose and objectives." So that, I think, speaks to, we've discussed before, the need to generate $1 billion in revenue a year in order to allow for $15 billion in bonding to support capital projects. So then there is discussion, a little mention about the modeling that's going into the analysis. And the modeling is not complete, and the toll rates have not yet been determined, obviously, and they won't be identified in the environmental assessment. The toll rates are to be determined by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority Board after the environmental review process is complete, and the Traffic Mobility Review Board has submitted its recommendations. So that tells us that it is going to be still a long time before we really have any finality in terms of knowing what the tolls are going to be, and it's going to be based off of well, the exemptions and credits and such. So subject to change and based on the amount of the credits and discounts and exemptions that will ultimately occur, at this point, they stated that the range of toll rates for automobiles is currently projected to be between $9 and $23 for vehicles that use Easy Pass, and for those without Easy Pass that pay by plates that are photo enforced, it is assumed at this point to be somewhere in the $14 to $35 range. Tolls for trucks and other vehicle types would have different ranges. Ostensibly, trucks will be priced at a higher rate, and there was definitely discussion and some requests for exemptions for motorcycles. I'll let Alita mention that in a minute. I also was very intrigued by the fact that they mentioned that the central business district, for tolling purposes and what they're analyzing, is inclusive of 60th Street, which makes me wonder whether that means that vehicles on the Queensboro Bridge whether they will be tolled. And I don't think there's any answer to that. That's one of my major questions in order to understand what the implications are. The study area for the environmental assessment includes the tolling district below 60th Street and neighborhoods near the central business district boundary where the project could have social, economic, or environmental impact. So they did acknowledge that Upper Manhattan is one of those areas. They didn't say specifically, well, they actually did mention near the central business district toll boundary. There's discussion about environmental justice, and there will be an environmental justice technical advisory group, which is an invite-only group. There will also be an environmental justice stakeholder group that any member from the public that's interested may submit their interest on the congestion pricing website or webpage on the MTA website, if anyone is interested in doing that. They will be assessing the impact on the areas near the boundary of vehicles traveling through Manhattan, but don't enter the local road network. And this is what I want to note. Preliminary analysis, according to the presentation, shows that some drivers may change their routes, and thus they will be looking further into the potential impacts in areas like Upper Manhattan. This is where they talk about Upper Manhattan, for impacts such as traffic, air quality, and noise. So they acknowledge that there is some analysis that shows that vehicles may change some behaviors, but in other cases, they've done preliminary analysis where they're not anticipating outcomes, such as analysis that indicated that any shifts of modes from driving to transit will not create overcrowding on the transit network. They believe that the shift to transit should not impact access to transit services, or pedestrian circulation near transit stations and hubs. Again, that's preliminary analysis, but I did think that was noteworthy. Also, preliminary analysis indicates that less than 1% of central business district commuters are lower income individuals who drive into the zone. So they don't believe that there's going to be a large impact on lower income people. They did mention, interestingly, the impact on minority taxi drivers and the taxi industry, and they will be assessing that. The models that they're using are predicting a 15 to 20% reduction in traffic in the central business district resulting from congestion pricing, and they also note that it is anticipated to improve travel times and air quality. Now, the timeline, just so everyone has an understanding of this, because this is, I think, very important here. The current environmental review process, the actual environmental assessment is being prepared between now and January 2022. It will be available for comments between February and May 2022, and then it will be reviewed by the Federal Highway Administration, which will ultimately decide whether to approve it or not and issue a finding of no significant impact, which would essentially allow this to then move forward. That review period will take place between June and December of 2022, and during that time, outreach regarding toll rates will also be conducted. So then, as I said, upon final determination by the Federal Highway Administration, if approved, there will be future hearings as part of the Implementation and Traffic Mobility Review Board process. So that brings us into 2023. And then I not mentioned at the meeting, but I've seen this in some articles that I've read. The toll system will be operated and maintained by a company called Transcorp, which was awarded a $507 million contract to design, build, and operate the toll system equipment and infrastructure. They, being Transcom, have up to 310 days from the date that the Federal Highway Administration approval occurs, assuming it does, to quote, go live. And then from that point where it goes live, it's been reported that there may be a 60-day period in which tolls are actually collected. So at this point, that really is bringing us to mid to late 2023 at the current pace, at which point we would potentially see tolling. There is some discussion. There are a lot of people who have acknowledged the pace not being sufficient in their opinions. So there is some pressure that's being being put on officials to speed up this process. I'm not sure whether it's going to happen. And then in terms of other future outreach for this committee, I did have a conversation with the DOT, and their message was clear that they are not in a position to do any outreach. They are not the lead agency on it. They obviously will be cooperative and participate in any outreach that occurs that's being done by the MTA or Tribal Bridge and Tunnel Authority, but that there will be meetings held with community boards and discussions with those officials from TBTA at some future point in time, and New York City DOT will be part of that. So that's a lot that I just provided, and hopefully that covers a lot of bases and a lot of the questions that people may have, but that's where we are now. Hopefully we all have the same information that we could use to continue our discussion. Alita, do you want to now go into any themes in terms of the comments that were made that you heard?
I do. So I joined a few minutes late. They must have really packed the beginning of the meeting with a lot of information. There were a lot of people who spoke, a time limit of 2 minutes, and they were very strict, even cutting off elected officials. But there were some themes that came through. One had to do with the border of the CBD. Some people suggested moving it north and covering the entire borough, while others, as we've heard, have urged that the border be moved a little bit south so that people will not have to pay the toll just getting on the Queensboro Bridge, although it may just be that anyone on the Queensboro Bridge will have to pay the toll based on what Craig was saying. There were exemptions issues. Some groups were calling for no exemptions at all. Other groups were concerned and wanted exemptions for various reasons, including equity for people, particularly lower income people, concerns about those seeking health care in Manhattan, as the Assembly member mentioned. There was talk, but I wasn't sure why, about police in their own private cars being exempted. There was a lot of opposition to that. There were urges for consideration of a vehicle's environmental impact and a lot of concern with the size and amount of SUVs traveling the roads and the negative impact on the environment. There was a group of motorcyclists who urged an exemption for motorcycles going into the zone and how motorcycles contribute to the environmental health of the city and take up far less space, both in driving, because you could be allowed to have 2 motorcycles in 1 traffic lane, and parking with, I think, 4 to 5 motorcycles taking up the space of 1 car. So there was a small but vocal group of pro-motorcyclists for that. Of course, there were some, as the Assembly member mentioned, and as Craig mentioned, calling for representation on the Transit Mobility Review Board so that we will have a voice that's heard. And then there were comments on the need for congestion pricing for environmental reasons as well as safety reasons. And then the environmental review, a call for a quick environmental review. And I have just some questions about that, which I know that you can't answer, Craig, but I'm wondering how they'll be able to assess the impact on other communities before the implementation, and where and when they'll measure things like air quality, because it's come up with other concerns, not relating to congestion pricing, but other buildings, for instance, where there is a potential environmental impact. And then some people called for immediate implementation of congestion pricing, and those were pretty much the same group that called for no exemptions for anybody. So those were the themes that that stuck out at me during the 2.5 hours of, or more than that, of comments for the MTA. Did you have anything that I left out, Craig?
No, not that I could think of. Just, I suspect the answer to your question that you just posed is that there are very elaborate traffic modeling platforms that are used by traffic engineers that have many, many different inputs, and based off of all the different factors and combinations of potential policies, it will generate different outputs in terms of potential impacts of congestion pricing, based off of the prices that are charged, based off of the boundary that exists. They could change it to look at it really incorporates every part of the transportation system, not just the roadways themselves. So that's how they're able to then essentially look at the diversion rates based off of tolls or projected tolls onto public transportation. And by doing between that and the number of people that would cease driving and the reduction of vehicle miles traveled, they can make estimates for the air quality improvements. That's generally how these things are assessed before they're implemented.
Good thing you're a traffic guy, because that's a lot of info. I mean, it's a lot of stuff you know about that is useful. And then there was also some concern expressed for the streets that have a particular aesthetic quality, such as Madison Avenue, that the tolling mechanism not interfere with the aesthetics of the street, particularly when it flows continuously north and south of 60th Street. So that's again the summary that I have. And shall we break into a discussion, Craig?
Sure. I was going to suggest that if anyone has any questions on anything that Alita and I just talked about, not comments or opinions necessarily, but more just questions based off of the information that was presented at the meetings, or what our sense of the feedback was, things of that nature. I think we can start there, and this can help us determine how the rest of the discussion tonight will flow. And I think certainly one of the things that we should start talking about tonight, I don't think it would be a discussion that would be completed tonight, but we should definitely at least strategize about how we want to tackle the question of credits, discounts, and exemptions, because that's maybe something where we want to take a position, and that is really going to be one of the most critical factors as we move forward in terms of the task force and trying to influence the Traffic Mobility Review Board, because that's going to determine so much
in terms of being proactive. So before we start to call on people, Will, do you want to do your introduction? Did you already do that? Do you want to do your introduction?
I did not. No. If you want me to, I'm very happy to.
Yeah, because I see there are both members of the public and board members who've raised their hands. So it could be useful. Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Now that we've moved into a discussion portion of the meeting, everyone is welcome to participate. If you would like to participate and share comments or questions, you can do so by going to the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen and pressing the raise hand button there. It's a button that says raise hand. It's not a wave or the thumbs up. Those will disappear if you press those. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. And be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once either of the co-chairs call on you. The chat is available for technical support to help with the Zoom software. It is not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will never see those chats. And finally, if you're using an older version of Zoom, please, you can look for the raise hand feature under participants where it might be there. If you're, we also ask that if you cannot find the raise hand button, you chat us. Please do not raise your actual physical hand or wave at the screen because there's several people in the room and we may not be able to see you. So just chat us if you have any problems.
Thank you, Will. So let's begin with members of the public. I see Lynn Erlanger. Is that Erlanger? Is that correct?
Go ahead and unmute, Lynn.
Yes. You want to talk?
No, you.
Yeah, I'm a little new to this, but we live within that area. And I don't know, I'm sure you've heard this before, but what is the logic for charging the people who are actually residents of that area who have a very low environmental impact because they practically never drive? But if you want to go, if you want to go on a trip upstate or to another state or something like that, you get penalized just for doing that. So,
Or even a different place, in Manhattan. Like if we want to drive to Central Park from 29th Street to 65th Street.
but let's say you're going on a trip to New Jersey or Pennsylvania, and then you get charged. Do you get charged twice, like $30 to $15 each time? What is the logic of charging people who live there?
What happens?
Craig?
Well, I don't want to try to
Not logic. What happens?
to put words in anyone's mouth in terms of the logic. I will say that there are numerous people that made similar comments regarding people who reside within the district and whether they should be eligible for discounts or credits or exemptions. And there are examples in other cities of residents within the tolling district receiving discounts. That being said, if you're looking at it from the perspective of the goals and objectives of reducing and providing a disincentive to drive in that area, that would be the reason why you would be tolling everyone and limiting discounts even for those who live within it. So again, I don't know that it's appropriate for me to comment. I don't want to inject my opinions in anything. I just want to at least present what the general viewpoints are.
I thought you'd best be able to sum up the MTA and the state's viewpoints. I do want to mention though, because I saw this on a sign about congestion pricing at an MTA station in Westchester, I think, that it's not just entering and leaving the zone, but if you live or work in the zone and keep your car there and drive it around, that seems to mean that you'll also be told.
And I don't know if that has been determined yet. I think part of the discussion that's taking place as they do the planning process is whether they're going to be setting up a system where the cameras and the Easy Pass Easy Pass stanchions are going to be set up only at places where you could enter and exit the tolling zone or enter and or exit the highways that you can drive on if you wish to go through the district without being tolled. So I think it's to be determined as to whether driving within the zone will result in being tolled, or if you're told when you leave the zone or enter the zone. Again, they did say you're only told once per day, and it's not clear to me yet though whether that means you can drive within the zone and as long as you don't enter or exit it and you stay within it, you're not going to be told.
Yeah, the language on this particular poster was very specific. It said enter and leave or remain in the zone. And that's why I emailed you, because I wasn't sure about it. But I guess it is to be determined, and some of this may be responsive to the public's opinion. I don't know. So those are, I guess that's the best answer that we could give, Lynn, since we're not the MTA, we're not the state, and we don't have access into their complete thought process on this. So thank you. We have Jamie Blank from the public. Jamie?
Yes, hi. Similar to the last question in terms of exemptions, I can put my video on. In terms of the exemptions, it didn't come up that there'd be exemptions for Manhattan residents. And I think as a car owner who pays a 10% tax to keep my car in a garage, I pay exorbitant taxes living in Manhattan. I have a young family. It's driving someone like me out of the city because I use my car. I have 2 little children. I drive downtown. I go to dinners downtown, and I live on the Upper East Side. It's ridiculous. Like, this is the borough that I live in, and how many times can you tax $1? Like, it shocks me that in your list of exemptions that one wasn't raised, and I think that.
I apologize for that, but that was something that came up quite frequently, was the work, it came up a few times, was the idea of taxing Manhattan residents to use their cars in the borough when Manhattan residents are taxed at quite possibly the highest rate in the country. So
Correct.
it is of concern to people, but there's no definitive answer on what exemptions there will be, or when, or for whom.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that if anyone here has thought about an exemption, it was mentioned. There were a lot of different potential exemptions that were mentioned, but at the same time, it was a meeting that really encompassed a diverse set of viewpoints, including a lot of people who are very supportive of congestion pricing and very adamant that there should be few, if any, exemptions at all, believing that that would defeat the purpose of congestion pricing and that it would have detrimental impacts on those who wouldn't be eligible for a discount. It would drive up the price to the highest parts of the range that were mentioned. So literally everything that I could have imagined someone saying was said in terms of potential exemptions. It's just now a question of what's being recommended and how how's the Traffic Mobility Review Board going to decide on which ones to move on or not?
But this is my home. This is where I live. This is not like I live in New Jersey and I decide to go into Manhattan for the day. I live here. It's like I travel to LA a lot. You live in a neighborhood, you get a parking permit in your neighborhood. If you don't live in that neighborhood, you can't park on the street. It's very basic, and it like, you're telling me I can't drive in my home? Like, I can't, I mean, it's kind of absurd. And to your point, given the amount of taxes that we pay as Manhattan residents, it's just another ding to the taxpayer of the city, that it's just an outrage. I find I've another reason why people are moving out. That is why people are leaving the city as a city resident. If people don't want to come into the city because they have to pay, then that's fine. But don't tell me who lives here and is trying to make a life here with my 2 children, and I want to stay here. This is another reason to move out. There are issues in the public schools. There are issues with safety. There's 1,000 reasons to move out. And I've born and raised here. My whole family's from here. I don't want to leave, but this is another reason to want to get out of this city. My parents too live 10 blocks from me. They have a place in Florida. They're ready to go to Florida full time because they've had it. It's just like, come on, people. Like, what do you want to do? I just don't hear it voiced enough. It's frustrating because I purposely came to this meeting because I've never heard anywhere this side in a loud manner, and that's I want to make sure that I hear it all the time from residents in Manhattan, and I never hear it publicly.
There was concern expressed last night about it. Also, the idea of residential parking permits, which is a controversial idea, was raised. It's something that's come up in the Transportation Committee, for instance, correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, at CB8, or whether there should be residential parking permits. And the idea of placards too. If the city were to eliminate parking placards, that would be a way of cutting down traffic without imposing the congestion, without imposing some other requirements on people who live and work here. So, and I think we can't do, Craig and I talked about this, and we don't think that there's been enough notice to enable us on the topic of exemptions to be able to format and vote on a resolution this evening, but it is something that we'll come back to at our very next meeting. So certainly, Jamie, you should come, encourage other people who have different points of view about it, because our job is to hear what the community's concerns are, both in favor of and in opposition to specific exemptions, to specific tolling structures, and to other concerns about the plan.
So, thank you for your comments. I think we should move on to the next speaker, which is Evelyn David. Can you please?
Hi, good evening. I heard both you and I believe Russell was on last night too. Yes?
Yes.
Very good. Trying to get these people to acknowledge that, you know, they're going into a zone that's actually a residential zone and they're causing a lot of controversy anyway. So I'm going to start with just quickly, the exemption idea in London. As I said last night, the people that live in the zone get a 90% discount. Nobody knows that. Nobody talks about it. I'm just putting it out there. I know that. Okay. So now everybody knows that on the board. Okay. So number two is my question really to the people doing this. We are not Lower Manhattan. We are not the business district. We are a residential area, and we're not the central business zone. So them finagling around about this 60th Street, by the way, coming off the bridge, you're technically going on to 60th Street. If people on that bridge don't want to get tolled, they can turn right somewhere on the bridge, towards the end of the bridge, and get on 63rd Street. What a mess that's going to be. Or they can get on 62nd Street with their beautiful bike lanes, right? That one lane 62nd Street. I can foresee, do you know what I mean? They could get on 62nd Street, go to First Avenue and go north. I mean, I'm just foreseeing this. I'm just putting it out there. That's why we need somebody on the committee, both sides of the line, which brings me to the line. The area of 60th Street and 61st Street has the water, sewer, telephone, electrical, gas lines. The main water, sewer, telephone, electrical, and gas lines are all located on 60th and 61st. Whenever there is, for the area, when there is a problem, I know this with my telephone, I know this with water, I know it with sewer, that's always being constantly, like 62nd Street's always been ripped up. But that's just, having said that, 61st Street was closed for about almost a year once, or 6 months. I remember they would open the barriers to let me to go to work because I'd zoom across at 7:30, and that was the cutoff time. So closing those two streets, 61st and 60th, or either one or the other, is going to force people down into the zone. Now, the other issue of parking on Park Avenue, on the east side of Park Avenue, between 60th and 61st, there are about 15 spots that you're cutting off. So, I mean, I was kind of like last night saying, we're begging you to put it below 60th Street. The real answer is to put it below 57th Street, so people can get off the bridge and get back on the bridge. They can go across town if they want to and park in the West Side garages. It'll alleviate some problems, but anyway, that's kind of my thinking. Kind of sticks with all of this, you know. And entering and leaving the toll is a real. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're speaking. Go ahead. I thought you were finished.
No, okay. Entering and leaving the toll zone. I thought if you go into the zone, you get charged. Period. That's it. If you leave the zone, you don't get charged. But now, according to this poster that you read, so that really has to be clarified. Okay. And they cannot charge people if you have to go down, people that make deliveries all day long or pick up and then go back and deliver, they're going to get charged $23 for entering and leaving and entering and leaving.
No.
They might as well not do.
I think that's what Craig was clarifying, was that people will be charged once per day, whether you spend 20 hours driving around the zone or you go in and out 100 times, you'll be charged once per day. It's the exemptions of people who might not be charged. And I remember your comments from last evening. I don't think, and Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, that unfortunately that the subject of the border is open for discussion for the MTA, but we I don't make the rules, but we will certainly make note of the
Okay.
comment about the zone. We
Right.
know that we know that it's an important issue for people going on and off the bridge.
The zone is.
It is also for the parking on Park Avenue on the east side, that is 15 parking spots you are cutting off. And Liz Kruger actually was open to this idea. I remember when we were having this congestion meeting one night, Liz Kruger was on, filled with facts and information. And, you know, the idea of 60th Street, she said it was possible. She left that as a possible. They are, by the way, listening to every single comment on every meeting, that Liz Kruger's office. So I think she's more in our camp than you might. I don't want to get discouraged or depressed.
No, don't get
Not yet.
discouraged and depressed. And Senator Kruger is an exceptional representative of the community. So
Right.
let's leave it at that and move on. And we'll take notes of your comments, and she will as well. Our meetings are also on YouTube for anyone who's interested in seeing them. And we will have a further discussion and a resolution on these issues, or on at least on the exemptions. So thank you very much, Evelyn.
And just as a matter of clarification, two things. One, this task force isn't in a certain camp, so I don't want anyone to think that we are predisposed to one position or another. We work on, we try to work on a consensus basis, but obviously any votes that we take as a task force then go to the full board. So the full board really is the ultimate arbiter of the positions we take. And second, the reason why at this point 60th Street is not negotiable is because it is legislatively mandated. The 2019 budget bill, which enacted congestion pricing as a policy, specifies 60th Street. So any changes to that would have to go through the state legislature and the governor. So it's not that it would never be considered, but it's not something that the Traffic Mobility Review Board at this point has the ability to unilaterally decide to change. As we move forward, again, as I said earlier, I'll just make a friendly request that we try to use this as a question and answer time and not to just state positions that we've already stated in the past or that have been discussed. We want to try to use this to try to really strategize as to what we need to do as a task force to be able to hopefully move forward and be able to figure out the questions that we need to ask and pose to get clarifications and to be able to determine potential outcomes and resolutions that we may wish to put forward.
That's right. We're interested in a discussion of next steps, and at least on the exemptions of discussing and getting a consensus, or at least in this task force pending, as Craig mentioned, the full board. So let's move on and see if there are other questions or focal points. Julianne Britannia, Will, thank you.
Hi, I just want to thank you, Alita, for everything you and Craig have said so far, just to sort of zone in on questions. I think one of the things that Evelyn David just mentioned is something of great concern. I think there's no doubt in anyone's mind that's on this call today that we need to have Community Board 8 put in their resolution some kind of protective measures that will protect the lower 60s, because there is no doubt that there are ways off the Queensboro Bridge. I know Evelyn mentioned it and other people will probably mention it too. 61st, 60th, 62nd, and 63rd all have ways to come off that bridge and to filter in that direction to avoid some of these tolls that, you know, aren't exactly determined where they're going to go, but we hear where they're going to go. And so I think your resolution needs to make sure that we include protective measures in the lower 60s so that people aren't avoiding and or loitering. And I say loitering, I don't know what the right word is, where they're really just hanging out in these 60s to avoid going into the zone. So parking's going to be a concern. I think for residents that live in Treadwell Farm Historic District, we have 8 garages in our neighborhood, literally, on these few blocks. And all of those garages are now going to probably be, you know, oversubscribed, as you want to put it. typically we've been in these garages, but I don't know what's gonna happen. Are people just gonna purposely go to the garages as they come over to the city and therefore almost price out regular residents that have been in this area? And are there any permits or requirements that allow people that live in these zones, as somebody had just mentioned, and pay in these zones? How do we protect ourselves for parking locally in garages? Forget about street parking. But I do think, it cannot be left behind that we have bike lanes on 61 and 62. We have one lane of flowing traffic and one lane of commercial parking on many of these streets, and lots of restaurants with outdoor seating. So these are very, very congested streets to begin with. So to have all this traffic now infiltrating a very heavily trafficked area, there needs to be some resolution put on your forwarding bill about this. And I think protecting residents is one, but also how do we prevent the loitering of parking vehicles, whether it's Uber or others that really just want to sort of hang out and wait for pickups in this area. I think it's going to be a big concern.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Julianne. And I'll just say that in my testimony last night, I actually specifically mentioned my concerns about the bridge and traffic really gravitating towards the upper level that's inbound so they could exit north of the zone. That's why, as I said, it's not clear to me as to whether the Queensboro Bridge will be tolled under the plan, since technically the bridge itself is below 60th Street, since it is the 59th Street Bridge. And they did mention that, and other cities have experienced that drivers do not tend to inundate the zone or the boundary area and park over there. But I think there is a special consideration for the bridge itself, because if you send all the traffic to the upper level because they're trying to avoid the toll, even if they were not ultimately destined for the toll for the district, that could have an impact. So hopefully they are aware of it, and that is something that we should definitely consider. So thank you for those comments.
I think next we have Colleen Conboy. Will, would you unmute Colleen?
*6 to unmute Colleen.
Thank you.
Again, that's *6 to unmute.
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I live on the Upper East Side for 27 years, and we do have a car and raising our children here, and now they're older, but we also are a small business owner. My husband owns a business in the 60s. We do have a car because we need to go to Brooklyn sometimes, or down to the Bowery because he owns a restaurant. The restaurant industry in the past year and a half, as everyone knows, everything has just hit the restaurant industry. The amount of overhead and extra expenses, this is just another hit to the industry, because it's already bad enough that all our deliveries, they're already charging fuel charges because of the cost of gas. And now we're going to be having this new charge on every delivery that we have. It's just something else. And it's already bad enough, even as a resident of the Upper East Side, as I went out today, and there are two big Amazon trucks, and they have taken up car spaces at the parking along the curb. And then they have another truck double parked, and they have all their deliveries out on the avenue of Lexington and 84th Street. This is their office. This is where they conduct business. And then a little further, you're going to have Fresh Direct, and then you have something else, and then you have all these food trucks. You try to find, and then the city bikes taking up parking spaces. And in my neighborhood, there has been 4 huge parking garages that have closed down, and that is to new development. Okay? So I don't know, even in the 80s where I live, where anyone's going to park, and we have a car.
we hardly use it. So now it's like when we even need equipment or anything, when we used to jump in the car and we're like really in need of something that moment at the restaurant for the business, we knew that we could drive down to the Bowery or drive out to all the equipment companies out in Brooklyn and get what we need. But it's just like the other person, Jamie, who said this is just another thing to hit residents of Manhattan. I mean, the cost of even just taking the subway, and when you have 2 kids, it's 4 people, just even taking the subway, what it costs. And now to drive your car, you're being charged. And it's just one thing after another, but it's also very upsetting as a business owner, because I even have a call tomorrow to a commercial realtor, and it makes me, because we're looking for another space, and it makes me think, oh my God, should we not even think about, or where should we even look? Because it's just another expense. Then we have the commercial property taxes. It's like, where does it ever end? And like that woman said, Jamie said, it makes you rethink about living here. I never want to leave here, but it's just over the past few years, it's just become, and as a business owner, it's such an environment that is not business friendly. And that is something that we built our business for 13 years into a successful business. We employ a lot of people, and it's just become so discouraging because every time we turn around, it's an increase.
Well,
And I know that's not a question. I just want to voice my concern as people that own a small business in this city.
I hear your concerns, and thank you for raising them. Please feel free to attend our community board small business committees. I have to say I co-chair those meetings too, and we're always interested in hearing from and hoping to improve the business environments for small businesses. But you raised something that made me wonder, and I don't know how we would do this, and I don't know if people want to do this, but the idea of delivery trucks charging and making a profit off the toll by charging multiple people for each toll, I wonder if that's worth thinking about, Craig. I don't know, but we certainly want to avoid the situation where they get charged $15 or $20 and then pass that on to multiple people, because it may not foster a thriving business environment. Okay, but thank you very much, Erica. Barbara Mutterperry? I'm having trouble.
Oh, you're skipping Erica.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I thought we got Erica. I'm so sorry, Erica.
Thanks, Alita. So I moved to Europe a few years after they implemented congestion pricing in London. I didn't live in London. I lived in another European country, but I spent quite a bit of time there personally and professionally. I also have a lot of friends that live there now, and they absolutely support what it has done to help their city to have congestion pricing there, 100%. New York City was never meant for the amount of cars that we have coming in and out of the city. One, two, the amount of people that are actually impacted by this that live in the zone, I don't know what the percentages are. Maybe somebody who's closer to it Alita, can you speak to that? But
I can't. I wonder if Craig could.
Most
I don't
people
know.
do not own cars in the city. My parents have a car. When they come into their apartment in the city, they park it on the street and they don't move it. They either take the subway or they take the bus. And it's always been like that because my mom needed a car for business years ago. But even when personally, the car would never move. I think what we have going on now is horrible. When you're outside walking, the pollution from trucks, cars, again, this is impacting so few people that live within the district. It's hard for me not to support the majority. And I also pay the same taxes and don't own a car. And I don't own a car for that specific reason, because it's just the car itself is expensive alone when you're talking about car payments and car insurance and registration and all that. I just think that we have to look at the many rather than the few in this. I mean, it's been delayed and delayed and delayed, but from everything I'm seeing and reading online, this time it's going to go through. So I think it should be equitable. I should think people should get discounts like they do in London, but I think it has to happen because it's not sustainable what's happening now to our environment, our roads, and quality of life.
A lot of that was expressed last night in terms of the environmental and the safety reasons that support congestion pricing. So,
and the fact remains is that it impacts very few people that live within the district. I imagine that the percent of people that own cars within this community board district is very low.
I don't know those numbers. Craig, do you, before we go on to, I guess, to Barbara?
I thought, and don't quote me on it, but I thought it's about 25% car ownership. It may have been, it may be slightly higher in certain areas, and post-pandemic, there may have been an increase from my understanding, but I don't have the data offhand and don't remember.
That would make sense, but the city was never meant to be a car city like it's become in the 21st century and even in the late 20th century. It just wasn't. I mean, we can debate how the subway system and the MTA needs to be improved, but that's not what this discussion is about. It would never occur to me to get into a car and drive to dinner in the city.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Sorry, Erica. Thank you.
And that number is 28%.
28% of people in the city who have cars?
No,
or people
Upper East Side.
Oh, the Upper East Side. Okay. Thank you, Will. That was fast. Could we
Rohit,
go?
Rohit.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Could we go to Barbara Mutterpearl then?
Hi, thank you. Well, I just wanted to give my support to what Jamie said and what I think Lynn said. And, you know, if there are only a few people, but it's actually 28%, that's quite a large number. But I was gonna say if there are only a few people, then I can't see why we just couldn't exempt them. But the other problem is there, as was mentioned, many cities do at least give residential parking to residents. Where if you aren't a resident, you can only park for a couple of hours. And that at least would cut down on all of the people who are going to come into the city from the suburbs and from Westchester and from wherever, and are going to be driving around on the Upper East Side looking for parking. I mean, if they think that the congestion pricing is just going to be from below 60th Street, it's going to be a zoo up where we live also. And I just can't understand why. I would think our board here would want to support the people who live here. And I see that there's different opinions on it, but I can't see that it's all one-sided. And that's really all that I did want to say.
I don't think anyone's suggesting that it's all one-sided. There are a number of different opinions and nuances and scales of opinions. So what we're interested in doing is capturing those varied opinions and formulating some kind of consensus over what our next steps could be and should be.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because it seemed when I was listening to you all that although you were making an effort to be neutral, that there really is quite a bit of support on the board for the congestion pricing, and maybe I've just read it wrong.
There is, but again, it's nuanced and there were a lot of questions. And even if the board is in support of congestion pricing, there are still steps that we could take to ensure that it's fair, or to have our voice heard for fairness, for equity, for consideration for residents and businesses' concerns. It's not all black and white or all 100% in favor or 100% in opposition. So that's what we're trying to do, is assess where people stand and what the issues are that we could and should raise.
Oh, okay. I mean, you know, I hope so, because I really think that they have to take into consideration the traffic that will be on the Upper East Side, with people coming in and not going below 60th Street specifically for that. And so for the 28%, who may own a car, and I understand some people hate cars entirely, but the cost of parking will go up enormously. And for some people, the car is a necessity. They drive out to Connecticut for work, where you could take public transportation, but when you try to get home, or like in my instance, you take a 95-year-old mother to a doctor's appointment. And so whether I drove or whether I took a taxi now that's going to be passing this along, the costs are going to go up enormously. So that's all. Okay.
Well, you should know, Barbara, that one of the things we oppose, which the Assembly member had mentioned earlier, was the congestion surcharge fee that taxis below 96th Street are currently required to charge. So that is something that that we have passed a resolution on a while ago and opposed. But thank you very much for your comments, and please come back and join the meetings. Let's go to Leah Hanlon.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Just for the record, I have a car. I used to reverse commute years ago, and in the last couple, I've needed to bring a car back into the city for to go out to Long Island for elder care reasons a couple times a week. I have a friend who does live in the zone in Murray Hill. And needs to go to Long Island for his mother, and he doesn't know what he's going to do. But my question was, I asked this of Liz Kruger when she was at the meeting, but I wondered if there was any discussion last night of the effect of the pandemic on congestion pricing. The rules of the legislation was passed before the pandemic. And obviously, things have changed a lot. So was there any discussion of that last night? And secondly, I've always had the impression that much of this legislation was kind of inspired by Governor Cuomo's my way or the highway approach to governing. And I wondered if Governor Hochul has taken any position on this. So those are the two questions.
Thank you. Thank you for asking questions as well. And I'd like to just take this brief time, as Craig attempted earlier, to remind everyone that we're trying to get questions out about either the new changes from the MTA and the state, or any of the trends that we noticed in terms of comments yesterday. But Craig, do you have answers to Leah's questions?
I'm not sure that I do offhand. I'm sorry.
Well, I think it was noticed that traffic congestion has increased or has not reverted to lower levels, and that
yeah. So I don't. So I guess the nuance there is, in terms of the MTA bridges and tunnels, those I track the data regularly, and we have basically reached our pre-pandemic levels for that. I don't know what it is within the street network in Manhattan. I've heard reports that it has basically returned to pre-pandemic levels, but I don't have a specific number of hands.
Part of that, of course, is that people are afraid to take mass transit, and so they're driving. But there may not be as many people in Midtown. I don't pretend to know what the answer of all of this is, but it certainly bears discussion, and I hope things are not just going into effect the way they were assumed to be before the pandemic.
I would hope that that would be part of the purpose of the traffic study and the environmental study, is to see where things are, but it's hard to predict because the behavior now might be, we don't know how many people are going back to work or how many people are moving back to the city or leaving the city for good. There are a lot of questions. How many people will take public transportation after things calm down, when they will calm down, what tourists will do when they come, domestic tourists, foreign tourists. So there are a lot of questions, but maybe with all of the data and ability to collect data that Craig had talked about earlier, there may be some kinds of trends or conclusions that might reflect a difference in post-pandemic or during pandemic behavior, for instance.
And Governor Hochul?
That I don't know. I don't know if you know, Craig.
She has, I think, given some generic support to congestion pricing, but hasn't given a more detailed statement or elaborated on her more generic support for it. So I guess we'll hear more from her as time goes on.
Okay, so then again, let's just take this opportunity to remind everyone that questions would be good, and we will be back for more discussion on specific points that you'll see in the agenda, such as exemptions. So let's go to Wendy McCaver.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. I wanted to thank Craig for such a thorough and excellent presentation, and for both Craig and Alita for their leadership in this committee. Anybody who's heard me talk for the last couple of years knows that I'm going to start off on an environmental note. 67% to 75% of all of our New York City climate change pollution is caused by tall buildings. 67% is the Department of Environmental Conservation figure, and 75% is a review article that was published based on peer-reviewed studies in Scientific American. And there are numerous studies that show that buildings above the 10th floor emit an exponentially greater amount of climate change pollution, above the 20th floor, an even greater, huge jump in climate change pollution. When we're talking about car emissions, the rest of the 25%, using the 75% figure just for ease of discussion, the rest of the 25% is every other possible cause, including car emissions, but not limited to that. It's light industry, it's people burning their fireplaces, it's every other emission source that is possible. The touting of this measure as being an environmental savior is just completely flim-flam. It's like, you know, whatever it was in one of the musicals where they said, you know, while you're watching one hand, the other hand is like robbing you blind. The MTA has a real problem and they need to raise funds. And that is an issue that we should all respect very much. And there should be a robust discussion as to what that means. It does not have to do with air pollution. And it's really offensive to hear that being said, because the real polluters are not, and pollution is not being addressed. In terms of the MTA needing funds, I have no doubt that they need funds, but there also has not been any robust audit. And they've been having problems on and off for years. And I remember maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a discussion that they actually ran a surplus and then that was buried. And so that makes me wonder about accounting systems, and it really needs an independent audit to see where are the problems, how much do they really need, and what is really going on. I'm very concerned in terms of small businesses because I do live in the Yorkville area, and I also have a really worn out pair of running shoes now where I walk everywhere in all kinds of neighborhoods, including into Midtown, including I've walked up from Battery Park City. It's a wonderful city to walk. And I see lots of store closures, and I talk with a lot of different store owners. And I think it's devastating to have certain restrictions because we want to encourage people to come back to the city. I definitely would like to have an independent study done on the traffic patterns, because I have to tell you that I know that there were times when Manhattan in Midtown was impassable. I had two elderly parents for whom I was caregiver, as well as having my own kids, my own family, and both of them in a wheelchair. It was not possible to take a taxi, and I did take their car to take them to their doctor in the 40s on Madison Avenue, and you know, already suffered the prices of the garages there, but it had to be done. I think I'd be interested to know, in terms of data, how many of our robust and vibrant elderly, CB8 has the largest proportion of robust, sentient, mobile elderly in the city. How many of them have cars, and for what purposes? I'm sure they're not driving them into Midtown every day. I do think that there are a lot of, I don't know how to term them, mom and pop, independent. I knew in terms of garment workers, I knew that there were small, I don't know if you can even call them factories, but especially in the outer boroughs, and they would bring their goods in to Midtown to sell them to in the fashion district. And they would be terribly impacted. It may not seem like much, $23 a day if it was, it may not seem like a lot to some people, but it is to a small business, and it mounts up and it becomes, you know, a week's worth of eating for a family of four. It's pretty profound. What I've observed in Midtown is that the congestion is nowhere near what it was pre-pandemic, and that many people are still working remotely and intend to remain working remotely. And what we really do want to encourage, especially we had Broadway open up, that's a huge boon to the theater, to the workers, all the workers, not just the actors, but all the stage crew and everyone, and the restaurants and all the other businesses that profit. And what we really need is a robust industry, and not to ward people off and keep them away. So I wanted to put that out there. But the environmental issue, it being an environmental basis for this, is absolute nonsense. In terms of the MTA, I think there should be a robust discussion about all the methods for raising funds and how much is really needed and how much mismanagement there is, because I think that's a discussion that needs to be had before we start to really tax the working class disproportionately. I am also a public member of the Social Justice Committee, where we talk a lot about racial justice issues. And I think that this disproportionately affects our neighbors of color who may be using their cars where public transportation is either not available or is not feasible, or, as somebody previously commented, if you have a large group traveling, it is not cost effective to use public transportation. And there is the safety issue that occurs now, and we still have not addressed policing issues. So there is not necessarily a presence in the subways as well. So we have a lot of other things to fix before we start taxing people who can ill afford it in this fashion for purposes that are ill-addressed on data that may not exist or needs to be verified or independently conducted in parallel to the city. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Wendy. Gail Benjamin.
First, I'd like to say I want to thank Wendy, because I concur with almost everything she said. I live on the Upper East Side. I used to drive to work. I did a reverse commute up until a couple of years ago. And I worked in a place that was impossible to get to by public transportation, and that was Madison, New Jersey. I still have a car, and I keep it to visit elderly family and relatives who live outside the city. I currently garage my car. And I'm concerned about, price gouging at garages. People coming into the city are going to look to park their car on the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side. There's no parking space, so the garages have a golden opportunity to increase their revenue. Number one, how do we prevent garages from gouging potential customers? Secondly, if we're going to implement this congestion pricing, and we obviously are, and try and control the number of cars coming into the city, we have to improve public transportation. This effort, I think, needs to be coordinated with the MTA, the Department of Transportation, buses, subways. Is there a group that is addressing that? What will be our transportation needs once we implement this program? Do we know what they are? Have we done studies on that? Just some of the questions, I have. That's it. And I thank you for your efforts on the board, both you and Craig. I think this is a long time coming, and it probably is coming, but I think there are many issues that we have to tie up.
Thank you. And thank you for raising those questions. The issue of accessibility for public transportation, for train stations in particular, was raised several times last night as well. And certainly there is a push to use whatever funds are available to increase accessibility for public transportation. What it will look like, what the system will look like, I don't know, but consistent signal trouble was pointed out, and clearly the needs of the MTA. And I should mention, at least one person said that the MTA has done such an awful job of managing its own funds. How can they be entrusted to manage these? But that's a separate question and doesn't require additional discussion. I just am alerted to things that were not necessary, or reminded of things that were not necessarily trends, but that had come up last night. So thank you all for your patience on that. And then I think we have one more member of the public before we could turn to the board, and that would be Philip Seliger.
Hi, yes, thanks, Alita. One of the questions I had was just raised, this has to be a coordinated thing with, with improved public transportation. Are there projections on what sort of since, we were speaking out about models, I might have missed it. Is there a projection on how much reduction in traffic this would yield, so that actually driving in a car is actually going to be, I guess, more enjoyable than it is currently? Then the second, was for me, when is this scheduled to go into effect? I mean, given that there's so many unanswered questions, is there any timeline proposed already? And that's it from my questions.
So I had actually mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting. You may not have been on at that point, but quickly, it was presented at the public hearing last night, and at all the public hearings, that the modeling that they're doing is predicting a 15 to 20% reduction in traffic in the congestion zone, and that they didn't give a percentage increase in terms of improved travel times, but it would result in improved travel times. And as far as the timeline for implementation, based off of the current trajectory of the length of the environmental review and the amount of time that's being granted to the company that's implementing the toll system, it doesn't look like it would be until mid to late 2023 at this point. That could change. They could speed up the environmental review process and move things up. But at this point, based off of the current timelines that they presented last night, the environmental review process will be completed end of 2022. And then we're talking about probably almost a year after that it would actually take effect.
Thank you. Okay, well, actually, there were a few more members of the public. Laura M.
Yes, hello. I'm wondering, even though it's probably an uphill battle, what, if anything, at this point can be done to undo congestion pricing moving forward? I agree with many of the speakers who spoke previously. I think this is egregious tax against the middle class, and we are the people that it's going to hurt most, those of us with families, with kids, with dogs, that drive our cars very judiciously. We don't drive all over the place, but we do have real reasons for needing cars. And I'm wondering if, one, when the governor election happens, if there is power there to set this back, and two, since there is a federal infrastructure bill pending that could potentially, who knows, throw money to New York if there's another way around this.
I guess I'll answer those questions. In terms of what can be done to prevent this from occurring, that it would be a political action at this point. As I said, this is a state law that was passed as part of the 2019 New York State budget bill. So if it were to not move forward, it would have to be through political channels, where the law would have to be modified or overturned. Wait, I'm blanking on what your second question was. Sorry.
Well, she lowered her hand. So Laura, if you could just come back, Will, if you could unmute her so you could ask your question again.
Sorry, it was how the federal infrastructure bill might help New York and maybe make this unnecessary.
So there have been statements made by public officials from the MTA who have indicated that the funding from any potential federal infrastructure bill is really separate and distinct from the funding that would be generated through congestion pricing. And while there would be benefits, obviously, from any federal infrastructure plans that get implemented, the capital plan for the MTA is still based off of the idea that they're going to have $15 billion generated through bonding from congestion pricings. And that doesn't even take into account the operating expenses as well, and the reductions in ridership that have resulted in lower fare box revenue as well. So according to the reports that have been put out there, it's sort of independent from any other federal actions that may be taking place. Thank you for your questions.
And thank you for the thorough explanation. Ora Mazarski?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question of sorts. I'm trying to get clarification and a comment. So my question is, and I've been attending most of these meetings, I'm trying to think, to understand how the decision was made in terms of, I know when one makes a decision or in a decision-making matrix, first you assess your situation, see what the environment is like, and consider past all the causes of your problem, and then consider what contributes to the problem and what other solutions have been tried. And I'm wondering, maybe I came in late on this about 4 years ago, but it seems to me that we have a solution, but we haven't really considered all the contributing factors. So for example, I was walking on 3rd Avenue in the high 50s today, and on the left side of 3rd Avenue on the uptown side, there was triple parking going on. On the right side, there was only double parking. The uptown bus had to go into the center lane in order to pull up away from the bus stop. My question is, have we considered parking, double parking, triple parking? Have we considered all these many factors before we come up with a solution of, okay, we'll have congestion pricing? I'm not asking for the entire history, but I'm asking, was there ever a study done of what is our problem, what approaches have been tried, and then we come up with this? Can I get a summary, please?
Maybe Craig could address that, although I think he has gone over it a little bit this evening. But congestion pricing is not just about relieving congestion for whatever reasons the state has come up with. It's also about revenue raising and funding the MTA. And so there is, I think it's $1 billion a year that they anticipate the congestion pricing plan raising for the MTA, or allowing bonds to the tune of, I think it's $15 billion to be funded by the money that's raised. So there is a very, very definite revenue goal that changing parking, and unfortunately, I agree with you, because Lexington Avenue is basically one traffic lane all day long because of parking and the bus lane. So I understand what you're saying, but that does not raise revenue, even with the tickets for the city, in the same way, I guess, that they're anticipating congestion pricing would raise revenue. Craig, maybe you want to add on to that?
No, I was just going to say, I am not personally aware of any studies or alternative analyses that took place regarding congestion pricing, but the concept of congestion pricing in New York dates back to the Bloomberg administration, to I believe 2007, 2008, when there was a initial plan that didn't move forward. So there's a lot of history here where this was viewed as an approach to dealing with a multitude of issues, and then finally it actually was enacted.
So what we're saying,
again, it's more. I think, as I said before, it's very much a political decision as opposed to having been done through a formal process where you looked at different alternatives. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't have reached that outcome, and maybe there was something that I'm not aware of, but I think that's the history as far as my understanding of it.
okay, that was kind of what I thought, but I just wanted to find out if I was missing something. So it seems like a solution in search of a problem. So if we're looking at the environmental aspect, now I'm showing my age, but I have a vivid memory of the time where you could get on an airplane and smoke cigarettes or a pipe or a cigar. Well, after the government and the CDC discovered that smoke, passive smoking can give you cancer. The airlines decided, and this is a vivid memory of, well, we're going to divide the airplane into smoking and non-smoking sections. My first flight during this time was in the first row of non-smoking. And air moving as it does, I was choking because the people in front of me were all smoking. You see where I'm going with this. So we have congestion pricing from 60th Street South. What if you live on 61st, 62nd, et cetera, and so forth? What happens to these people? Well, there's going to be a lot more congestion in their area because people are going to try to avoid going below 60th Street. So with good intentions, we're heading into creating another problem. And it seems like a very patchwork way and I'm wondering if that was considered the amount of added congestion and added car exhaust and pollution because of this.
It's definitely part of the overall modeling and traffic analysis, but there are also analyses that have been done to suggest that the benefits that would be generated in terms of air quality improvements in the tolling district would flow into the areas that are outside of the district, including our community as well, because there would just be fewer cars coming through our community to reach the central business district, to reach Midtown and below. So that's the flip side of it. So thank you for your comments. And I think we have one more commenter from the public. Timur?
Hi, yes, Timur Solomon. I'm actually one of those residents that the last speaker was speaking of. I'm a lifelong resident of 61st Street, right off of 2nd Avenue between 2nd and 3rd. Now, 2nd Avenue has become a thoroughfare for all trucks, all manner of cars. Everybody is funneled down 2nd Avenue as if it's I-95. I think the reality is that we're talking about emissions and all of these things coming from actually big buildings rather than cars, more so than anything. This cutoff at 60th Street is disproportionately hurting residents of small homes. From 61st Street South, you have big buildings again. But for the last 5 blocks above 60th Street, you have a large concentration of small buildings. Brownstones, smaller, shorter buildings, tenement buildings still existing, especially east of Lexington Avenue. And I understand that congestion pricing is going to move through and has been, as you said, a political decision for raising funds. But the key is this: what protections do we as residents of the actual really impacted area of the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side, the transition zone, no matter what the the DOT or the MTA believes, we saw very clearly when they installed bicycle lanes across 61st and 62nd Streets. They implemented something with no thought whatsoever. And then over the last a year and a half, started to change it and take away a lane here, grow the lane a little more in other streets. And, what they did was put something through that had no real basis in study. They just said, okay, we're going to put a bike lane in and that's it, as a political move. And it really impacted us in a negative way. Traffic is up to the point where now our traffic officers on 61st Street wave cars into the bicycle lane. So the concept of the bicycle lane is moot. The traffic officers have to push cars into the bicycle lane in order to keep the traffic moving. Now, it's going to be the same issue. I understand they believe that there's going to be a decrease in cars coming down 2nd Avenue or Lexington Avenue, but let's be honest and truthful in the fact that most of the volume comes down 2nd Avenue. And what is going to happen to us? It's almost like invoking eminent domain, decreasing the values of our properties, making our streets more dangerous. I am a father of 2 young children. I can't stop my car to unload my car without threat of being hit with a bicycle on one side or a car on the other side. There has to be some consideration for the local residents in this case. And not to mention my car, I do own a car, I do own a bike, and I use the subways, all of them. But the point is to take away our ability to actually live and stop in front of our homes and have access to our homes and be able to bring things other than by in hand to our homes is short. It's not just short-sighted. It's not even inconsiderate. It disregards our rights as tax-paying citizens who own physical property on that demarcation line. So it's just a little hurtful to hear that this is a political decision, because this is a decision that affects people's lives and especially longtime residents. So I'm hoping that some concessions can be made for residents of the Upper East Side, of the transition zones, of the Upper West Side as well. And I'm hoping that those things are taken into consideration, because we have now a newfound, or I have now a newfound belief that when it comes to a political decision, they push it through and they could care less about the people who are actually affected. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. And as Craig and I noted earlier, we are interested in being proactive and bringing attention to these issues to the Traffic Mobility Review Board. So thank you. Okay, let's go to the board then. Who do I have first? Michelle.
Thank you. Yes, I've been listening very, very carefully. I have 3 questions. I also have some comments. Firstly, I'd like to say, Gail, excellent points. Aura, excellent points. Barbara, Colleen, Jamie, I agree with everything you've said. I feel your frustration and I feel your concern. Evelyn, to your point, I would like to see one of your points that you made tonight and that you made yesterday at the forum, asking for parking lots in Queens. And I think that this board should turn some of these suggestions into resolutions, and not necessarily one resolution with a lot of suggestions. The reason I say that is it's very difficult to get a consensus from a full board of 50 if you have a whole list of many, many things that you're suggesting. I think if you break them down, it's a good idea. And I think there should be one resolution asking that if this congestion pricing scheme goes into effect, that we are asking that parking lots be encouraged or created, maybe municipal parking lots on the Queens side of the bridge, to encourage those out of borough residents, give them a place to park their cars before they take public transportation into Manhattan. I would like to see that as a freestanding resolution. I would like to see Wendy's concern about an MTA audit become a separate resolution. I don't believe that the MTA necessarily are prudent caretakers of their budget or their finances. And with all the government money that they've been given over the years, I think the public has a right to know. This congestion pricing thing has gone back to the Bloomberg administration, Craig, you're quite right. I was on the board at the time. It was a proposal at that time that was based and rooted in not very much information, and it didn't go anywhere because there was no public support of it. But those are at least 2 resolutions I'd like to see. Going to my questions, number 1, what happens if it turns out that the number of cars going into the district are not diminished, are not decreased? As you have said, this is probably not a congestion issue, it's a revenue issue. However, part of their PR and part of the public rhetoric is that it's trying to eliminate or decrease the number of cars in that zone. I want to know what happens if that doesn't happen. Secondly, the issue of crime in the subways has been raised as being a reason, especially recently, that people are not using the subways. So the question is, will the MTA, will the governor, will everybody take a look at crime in the subway and do some kind of evaluation as to how it decreases the number of riders, how it decreases their ridership, and what can they do about that? The second question is, what will they do about the streetscapes in the zone that they have created over the years that has exacerbated congestion, i.e., turning Broadway, which was a wide street thoroughfare for many years, the main access to the theater district, the district that is our cash cow that encourages tourists to come. That district has been choked off from the theater goers on the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, which are an older population than most in New York, and actually many of whom, if not most of whom, rely on four wheels of one kind or another to get down to the theater district. It's practically impossible because they have narrowed Broadway to one lane. They have put in pedestrian plazas. They've cut off through traffic at 46th Street, et cetera, et cetera. That and the bike lanes have led to an enormous amount of congestion in the district. Will they, here's a question, will they look at those plazas and will they dismantle them if it turns out that congestion is not helped by just the congestion pricing? What can they do to dismantle those to increase traffic flow? And the last thing I'll say is about the hospital workers. Our hospital corridor employs thousands and thousands and thousands of workers, many of whom, if not most, come in from the outer boroughs. And many of whom are in boroughs, are in areas that do not have transportation easily to get into Manhattan, and many of whom work a night shift that gets off at 7 or 8 in the morning, or gets off at midnight where they have to travel at night, and so they, for safety's sake, they do take their cars. Are we going to be punishing that population group with a toll of from $9 or $15 to $23 a day to get to work? It's hard enough to afford the fare of public transportation round trip. I don't hear them mentioned in any category. I would like that turned into a resolution asking that they be exempt. So I would like to see a lot of individual items here turned into resolutions to put before the board with the full recognition that whether or not you say the board is impartial, but the board is not impartial. We have a significant number of people who are pro-congestion pricing. We have others, such as myself, who are not. I would not say that it's a 50-50 balance, but I would say that to have one resolution with all of our recommendations will have you'll have a very difficult time getting not only passing it, but getting some kind of realistic evaluation of each of the issues listed in a resolution that has multiple items. So I would like to see a series of individual resolutions, such as what I have proposed, each having the whereases that would support their affirmative support. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And just from my point of view, I don't believe the board is and should be neutral, but I do believe that Craig and I, as co-chairs of this task force, need to be neutral. And in terms of the healthcare workers, we will take that up when we are discussing exemptions and who should get exemptions or discounts or rebates and to what extent. So thank you. And for the rest of your comments, Craig, anything to add?
No, I think we may want to start heading in the direction where we can state affirmatively that at the next meeting we will focus our discussion on potential exemptions. And I think we can then bring up some of these different groups and have a discussion regarding that. I don't know, I think we need to think a little further about some of the other things that Michelle said and as to whether they are germane to congestion pricing. Some of these, I think, are broader issues that are more generic transportation matters that may have ancillary connections to congestion pricing and its impacts, but I don't know that they are really, that this is the appropriate forum to have those discussions. But I need to just think about that a little more.
Okay. Elaine?
Thank you. I sit here thinking to myself, as a native-born Upper East Side Yorkville person, where are we? In the previous, I'm going to give you some background and then I have some questions that I want to ask. The previous time the congestion pricing came up, the East, and I am president also, not only a board member of the community board, president of the East 86th Street Association. At that point, when it first came up, the line was East 86th Street. And the issue was at 10 a.m., the border opened. And we asked, so what's the environmental impact of the cars sitting and waiting? No answer. Our community fought this and opposed it, and now it's at 60th Street. I'm going to raise some of the same questions we had then. Who controls the black box of the money that comes from the congestion pricing? We never found an answer. Why is it we've not instituted the commuter tax to raise revenue? The bottom line here is it's not about the environment. It is about raising revenue for the MTA, for which we have no information. At a hearing prior to COVID, I testified on behalf of East 86th Street. We asked about the finances and the fact that the top people at the MTA were making mega bucks. There was no answer. But why is it Manhattan is paying again? I have to tell you, I took my partner for surgery yesterday from 79th Street to 67th Street to MSK. There was an additional $3.80 added to the fee. The cab driver doesn't get it. It goes somewhere, but no one knows. It's part of underwriting the MTA. We have no data, no transparency on what's going on here. This is a total political financial piece. It has nothing to do with the environment. And the fact that our state reps supported this when the majority in our neighborhood said no, and I agree with our public members on this. The pollution is not the issue. It's an income piece. I grew up here. The city was about cars eventually and walking. I rode a bike at age 10. I would never ride one today. But the pollution does not come from the cars. I drove down last week from 125th and 2nd Avenue. The only congestion was not cars. It was the double parked school buses, trucks, and the police. And once I went below 96th, it got better. So the inference that congestion pricing will do, I'm not sure what, is not clear. There's no transparency. It has nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with an income stream for the MTA. And I do not understand why, if you need an income, you're not looking at what has occurred with all the commuter rails. We all pay, because we're next to a commuter rail, a extra tax on our payroll. I think it's 0.34% to underwrite the MTA. Why is it we've not looked at the finances of the MTA and the railroad, because I think it may be a broader term, and looked at what are we paying the high execs? What are we paying to run the subway system? And why is it we're not challenging this? We as Manhattan people should not be paying this. Anyone in our district is paying already $3.80 I paid the other morning at 5 a.m. Why? There was not a traffic. There's one big truck on York Avenue, and that was it as I went to MSK. Why is it we avoid looking at the reality that one sector of our society is going to underwrite multiple commuters, a transportation system that has been reluctant to share their finances? At the testimony I gave pre-COVID, they could not answer. And by the way, New York is a walking city, has cars, and it never was set up for bicycle lanes with motorcycles, unlicensed mopeds, or whatever we want to call it. And that's what we're dealing with. Our community is an aging community, and you're taxing us again and again. And I agree with the public members. I have to begin to think myself, why am I continuing to live here when my quality of life has changed because they think our neighborhood can continue to finance the rest of the city? This needs to be re-examined by the state government as to who pays for transportation. If the price of the subway has to go up, then raise it. But you're taxing, I think you said, Craig, it was 26% of the people in the neighborhood own a car. Indeed, I do, because my partner's disabled. But it's reached a point, I don't even know how to get to a doctor's office anymore because of the cost. And I'm not alone. We are the largest aging population in the city. And we have been taxed to the hoot. So I am asking, one, look at who's controlling the box and where the money's going. Is there an EIS above 60th Street? Because we sure fought it before. And also to look at the institutions have already negotiated with garages in the neighborhood to take over space so local residents can no longer park their cars, okay? What are we going to do? We're a community, we're below 96th Street. Our zoning did not permit garages in the new buildings. It's beginning to change with a variance, but it goes on and it goes on. We have no transparency, and I asked, where is the money going? Who's controlling? How much goes to the subway system and how much is going to the commuter rolls or somewhere else? Because no one knows who's controlling the money. And that was the big issue the last time round. And I'm sitting here as a native born 86th Street person who now says, where are we at when we have less accountability, less quality of life in our neighborhood, and we now are frightened by the crime on the subways and the lack of accessibility? And I don't care what the MTA is saying, there's no way when 86th Street subway entrance could not get with a development when they gave up the easement, a elevator to the express track. So I have no faith. And I speak on behalf of a lot of disabled people who say, I can get on one subway, but I don't know where I can get off. So I'm asking you to oppose the congestion pricing and to answer the questions or find out the answers on the various questions I did ask. You can hear I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm frustrated. I've been through this too many times. And we have a city and state now that no longer listen to the residents who live here, and it's anti-family and anti-quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you. And it certainly matters that we have representation on the on that review board, certainly at least to help allocate funds and that they not go in high proportion to the commuter rails. But I guess that's just my opinion, which I'm not supposed to give, but we do need that representation, which I think everyone can agree on. Thank you, Elaine. Lori?
Thank you, Alita. I just have a couple of comments. I agree with Erica and all of the comments that she made. We also have something else in common, but that's another story. The thing that surprised me, I went to the meeting last night, and I've always believed this from the start, but it was very reassuring to hear that New York is not the first city to institute this congestion pricing. And and there is no data, none, to suggest that people are going to drive in to our neighborhood and look for parking in our neighborhood to avoid the congestion pricing fee. Because, first of all, it takes a gazillion hours to find a parking space. Secondly, if you're going to put it in a garage, that it's going to cost you more to put it in a garage than it will for you to pay the congestion pricing fee. So, I mean, that the people who are afraid of that, I just want to reassure you that one of the things that came out at the meeting last night was that in London and in, I think, Rome, and I don't know the many places that this has been tried, but wherever it's been tried, there's no data that suggests that people come in and clog up the neighborhoods around the congestion pricing zone in order to avoid the fee. So the other thing that I wanted to say was that I was initially opposed to giving residents a parking permit, like to park on the street, and I'm still not sure what I feel about it, but I'm willing to consider it now. Just like I was thinking about it, and it might be like a trade-off if people would get a parking space, or like, if residents would get a parking space on the street, which I don't know. I mean, I was originally, what I'm saying is that, like, I'm open to considering it now. Not that I was, for it in the past. But the thing is, I think everybody just has to realize that, and this is not me, I'm not saying this, and New York is not the first person that's doing it. The society in general is getting away from cars in general, like personally owned cars, as well as gas, I don't know, it's combustion engines. It's like, look, the Ford company is going to make and General Electric, they're going to make all electric vehicles. So there's a lot of change going on in our society, and it's a good change. It's for the future. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, let's go back quickly to Michelle, and then let's talk about next steps, Craig. Michelle?
So, yeah, when you're talking about the future and you're talking about electric cars, along with that is the fact that the streets are going to be used for electric car chargers. I oppose that at the full board meetings, because electric chargers for cars should be placed as gas, like in a gas station. where a car pulls up and charges. So in addition to this, with losing our street parking, in addition to the City Planning Commission and its lack of wisdom, and unfortunately, this board supported it, the elimination of the necessity for garages being included in new residential construction. I am hoping that's going to be reversed. It was a ridiculous thing. And the other thing, whatever four wheels you think are going to be used, whether it be electric or gasoline or somebody pushing it, business is conducted in four wheels, and that is what you need. Deliveries, more things are done by delivery, so you will have trucks, and the costs of all of this are being passed on to the consumer. This is raising the price of everything. Inflation is here. It will only increase. And this putting further tax burden or pricing burden on any population is really something to be seriously considered. Also, I caution those of you who claim to know whether or not people need their cars. This is not for anyone to judge. This is also America. You are even allowed to have a car, even if you don't need a car. So, and it's not for someone else to decide who should have one, and if they do have one, if they should be punished for having one. That's not what we do here. Buying and selling cars is a very big basis of our economy. So I wouldn't be so fast to poo-poo it. And the whole electric car industry is not quite there yet. So let's not talk about that and talk about need in terms of what we think other people may or may not need. To me, this is about the freedom to have what you want, to have what you think you need, and an equitable way to spread the financial burden of that in a responsible way, and not have a political decision in support of an agency who we don't think is transparent, and we're not sure about its financial prudence. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Rit, you've got your hand raised. And I'm sorry, I struggled with your name, so please.
No, Rit, you got it totally right. So thank you for that.
Sure.
You know, I had put my hand down, but I guess we've gone past the idea that this was just a question discussion, but I do want to clarify a couple of things. Several people have made this assertion that somehow this is not about pollution by citing the fact that more of New York City's carbon emissions come from buildings than from the transportation sector. And no matter how many times you state it, it doesn't make it true. The fact is, yes, the majority of our carbon emissions come from buildings. There's been an aggressive set of city legislation that's been enacted to address that. Many things that, in fact, that I think a number of people on this board probably are not comfortable with, but an aggressive set of actions that are going to be necessary to deal with that. And to get the rest of it, to get that 25% that is related to trucks and cars, we have to do stuff. We have to make changes, and congestion pricing is one of those. There's another misconception that's been voiced many times about deliveries. The reality is that by reducing congestion, people and trucks and businesses that make deliveries are going to save money because they will make more deliveries in a shorter amount of time. And that cost, when you're paying a driver, when you're dealing with fuel and idling and all of that, they will save money net by paying this congestion charge. They will not lose it. And there is no evidence that it somehow gets fraudulently passed on to consumers. In fact, as we know, all of the delivery costs tend to be rolled up and included in the price, and that price is set by other factors. That's the market price. It's not some set of hidden fees that Amazon or UPS is going to tack on. And I think it's fundamentally ridiculous that people are making these assertions and asking questions and casting aspersions. The MTA's finances are not under question here, right? Yes, there's a lot that I've long advocated around MTA reform. That is not the issue. The issue on the table, and the only one we should be discussing, so we are not wasting our time, is what recommendations this task force and this community board should put in for how this thing is implemented. It is long past being worthwhile to discuss whether congestion pricing is a good idea. Another thing I will point out is that Governor Hochul, somebody asked this question, she has come out unequivocally in favor of congestion pricing. In fact, she has stated that her team is looking at ways to accelerate the timeline. And given that the MTA reports to the governor, presumably the leadership of the MTA would not be pushing it as quickly as it now is in the aftermath of Cuomo's departure, because he was delaying it until the election. She's rushing it now, which is a good thing to my mind. So the governor is clearly in favor of this. We have heard this evening disproportionately from people who own cars. I own a car, so I'm not helping that. But I think one of the things that we as a community board need to do is remember that the people who come out to talk are not necessarily representative of the neighborhood. And in a neighborhood where 28% of households have access to a car, and therefore 72% of households do not have access to a car, we really have to ask ourselves how we can claim to be at all a representative body speaking on behalf of the neighborhood when we really have only heard tonight from car owners. And I think that is a really important question. The overall validity of community boards as institutions is under question, and it should be, because we are so unrepresentative. And this is an opportunity for us to take that right. A final point I will make before I move on to some suggestions for what we might actually do that's constructive is I've heard many suggestions that a tax will lead to people leaving. And the reality is that auto ownership in this neighborhood is correlated with income and wealth. It does not mean that nobody of low income owns a car, but it is highly correlated. And we know from the data, because we don't have a ton of data on how people use their cars other than commuting, we know that people who live in this neighborhood and commute by car earn 33% more than people who live in this neighborhood and commute by other means. The average income of somebody who commutes to the CBD by walking or by transit in this neighborhood is roughly $75,000 in household income. It is over $100,000 for people who commute by car. And so the idea that this is somehow a tax on the middle class is ridiculous and unsupported by the data. And then finally, I lied. I have one more point to make. The vast majority of people who will pay this charge are people who are driving in from other parts of the city and other parts of the region. And what we have seen over and over again in London, in Singapore, in other places that have implemented this system or others, and we heard from this over the summer from that professor that Craig and Alita brought in, is that it has reduced overall trips. It has improved air quality in the surrounding areas because, as Lori pointed out, it's a relatively rare phenomenon for people to drive into the border area and then get in a taxi or get on the subway and go to their final destination because of the disruption. And whatever minor effect there is more than canceled out by the reduction in the overall number of cars that are driving through. In terms of resolutions going forward, I actually think that the suggestion of having instead of just one resolution, having a set, I would agree with that. I think it's very important for us, in order to be constructive and to be taken seriously, that we develop a constructive set of recommendations for the area around the 59th Street Bridge. I think that is one of the thorniest issues with the 60th Street border. And rather than complaining about the border, which I don't think we have any power, I think we should be thinking about what specific recommendations we can make to alleviate that. I heard a couple of them this evening. I think from the perspective of the Upper East Side as a whole and our community district, it seems to me that the right answer for this neighborhood is actually to make sure that all traffic going across the Queensboro Bridge is tolled. That will lead to less congestion at that really bad set of intersections where the Queensboro Bridge enters our neighborhood. I think we also need these exemptions
your connection
from
Rick, you may want to turn off your camera
The point of
because
view
your
of
connection
the
is.
100%
We can't,
of
Red, hold on. We can't understand you because
Sorry.
your connection is really wobbly.
Oh, shit.
You may want to turn off your camera. That may help it.
Is that any better?
Yes,
For the
thank you.
moment,
Alright,
it
sorry
is.
about that. And so I was, I don't know where you all lost me. Apologies for that.
Well, you had finished talking about the bridge and tolling the bridge
Okay.
to avoid the congestion in those
Yeah.
streets,
And
and
then-
then moved on.
Thank you. And then I think that we have to think about the potential set of exemptions from the point of view of all residents of the Upper East Side. I think that the more, as we know, the more exemptions are granted, the less there will be an impact on the congestion and the traffic buzzing through our neighborhood, the less impact there will be on the air pollution that we receive, because that was another point. Pollution is both greenhouse gas pollution, which does majority come from buildings, but the majority of our air pollution, which is the soot on our windows and our windowsills and in our lungs, that comes from the soot in truck fuel and the tire particulates that get thrown up when tires roll on asphalt. So the impacts for our neighborhood will actually get worse if there are more exemptions. And so I think we have to think very carefully about each category, not as it relates to that particular group of people, but also how that group of people having greater access to driving and more incentives to drive will have negative impacts on the neighborhood. And I will conclude actually by saying that like one or two other people here, I actually do think that a residential parking system is appropriate. I think it's something that would actually benefit this neighborhood. I think it would benefit many parts of New York. The Bloomberg administration proposal included residential permit parking exactly for this reason of trying to reduce the impact on the potential for parking in the surrounding neighborhoods and alleviate that fear. And I will suggest, I think it is an appropriate thing for us to recommend that, even though it would be the city rather than the state to implement that as part of our set of recommendations for how this is implemented. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Red. And to mirror one of your points, I think as we move forward, there are two clear directions in which I think we should be focusing on at our upcoming meetings. And probably each should be dedicated to one meeting as opposed to trying to tackle both. And that is, one, the broader issue of exemptions, credits, and discounts. And two, the issue specifically focusing on the area near the tolling boundary, the lower 60s, and we could even consider the upper 50s, 60th and 59th Street, that blacklist within our district, and to try to deal specifically with the unique set of issues that those stakeholders are facing. Alita, I do agree that
I do, because it's not just the entry and the exit from the bridge and the impact of the 60th Street border on that, but it's also the people who live near there, and thinking about the extensive and numerous discussions on those bike lanes on 61st and 62nd. If there is any additional traffic that does present some issues, it's certainly worth talking about. And based on the wide range of opinions on, and I'm sure that there will be when we get to exemptions, I think it makes sense to try and divide it up.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. And as far as I know, Rit and others have mentioned the idea of parking permits. I think we need to think a little further about how we could have such a discussion, because that there are broader implications there. I think we may want to first think about that as part of the lower 60s discussion, and then look at how we may want to broaden that, because I think we need to perhaps make the distinction between the need for there and this being there and the potential need for it in other areas that are near the boundary or in the zone itself, and how that relates to broader parking policy matters that transcend the rest of our district, Manhattan, or even the city. So I
And
think we just need to.
it seems to go hand in hand, or at least finger to finger in transportation issues. So maybe it's a joint item that we could do with the transportation committee, because there may be different groups of people who attend the meetings. And I think, because you raise questions, is it something that would have a geographical limit? Is it 65th Street, for instance, below? Does it only apply until you get to the border of 60th Street? I know Gail Brewer talked about people who live in the low 60s and park below 60th Street, and have already been calling her office about getting exemptions. So there are numerous issues. Placards were raised several times last night, and the impact of all of the placards on parking. So maybe it's something that we can explore with Chuck, and you stand with one leg in each committee, so that's okay. Michelle has her hand raised. Craig, or can we go to Michelle, or do you, and we could finish talking about an agenda offline as well.
Yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I believe the Transportation Committee and the full board did take up the issue of licensed parking in the district a while back. I'm not sure we have a resolution on it, but I remember that it was extensively discussed. I think it's a transportation issue, and I'm not even sure at this point, Alita, if it should be joint, although I think maybe eventually it should be joint, but I think it should certainly be, if you're going to readdress it, in the Transportation Committee. But if we have a resolution on it, which I don't recall, I remember extensive discussion. If we have a resolution, it's obviously a negative one because we never pushed for it. So to that extent, I'm not so sure that we should revisit it.
Well, sorry to interrupt, Michelle.
I was just saying we had a lot of concerns about the people who work in the district, for example, the staff of the buildings, the doormen, the maintenance staff, people coming in and out, rely on their cars. How would they have, a permit to park? Visitors, close family. I mean, I remember the discussion went on and on and on. And as I said, we either had a resolution to not support it, or we didn't have a resolution, but I know there was not much of an appetite for it.
So it's straight. You're absolutely right, and it was something that I don't believe we put forward any type of resolution. I think what we may want to do here is, as we look forward to the discussion regarding the low 60s, we can internally within this task force consider that as a potential option to consider, and then we could move forward with that and determine how we may want to either revisit it as a broader transportation issue, or whether we want to treat it in some other manner. But I think we've clearly heard, not only tonight and not only last night, but throughout the public meetings for the environmental review process, that there are at least some who have been bringing up the idea of parking policies and parking permits, residential parking permits again. And I don't know if it's going to gain momentum, but I'm sure people are paying attention to that.
We'll post it. One second, Michelle. We'll posted a reference to June 2018 transportation minutes, and that was before, I think, congestion pricing came in and before some of these other issues were raised.
No, it was Councilmember Powers' bill in response to the discussion about congestion pricing, and you guys invited Abigail Bresler, who was then legislative director for Councilmember Powers, who gave a presentation on their legislation, and it was discussed, but no action was taken.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, sorry. Will, you mean permits were discussed in this, by Keith Powers?
Yes, that was the legislation that the Transportation Committee discussed at the June 2018 meeting.
Yes, and
with reference to permits?
Yes, with direct reference to permits.
So are you, Craig and Alita, when you're thinking of bringing this up in conjunction with congestion pricing, are you only thinking of raising the issue in the low 60s?
No. I didn't know if that would be a conduit to perhaps discussing it further. As the minutes stated from our parking permit discussion, I wrote it, so I'll say I summarized it by saying, although there were differing views expressed by the audience and CB8 Transportation Committee members, there's general agreement that the proposal, in this case, the proposal being the bill that Keith Powers had put forward, was yet to be formulated to the specific degree necessary to cast judgment on the concept, and that additional study and fleshing out details would be necessary before action can be taken by CB8. So,
and then his bill died also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it was a moot point, at least in 2018.
Well, I don't think we need to decide it now. I think we could certainly, we could certainly decide it before one of the next couple of meetings, what makes sense and whether to pursue it as part of some broader discussion or in transportation. But I appreciate certainly your comments, Michelle, and going back and seeing exactly what the conversation was in the Transportation Committee at that time.
All right, so I think we have a plan in place pending further developments between now and whatever we aim for to hold our next meeting. And I think Alita and I had mentioned discussed between the two of us that ideally we'll have one next month. So I think it's just a matter of finding time on the calendar to have a meeting and looking forward to it.
Any other comments before we see if there's a motion to adjourn? Oh, any old business? New business? Rebecca?
It's not new business, so I'll wait.
Did you say it is new business?
It's not. I was going to make a motion, but I'll wait.
Oh, a motion to adjourn?
Oh, please make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have,
Okay,
there are no
motion
other
to adjourn.
hands up, so go right ahead. And Michelle's already seconded, so I think we could adjourn. What say you, Craig?
I'm hungry and hearing hangriness.
Uh-oh, okay, well, on that note, we better say goodbye, good night, and see you guys soon.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so
Night.
much.